Every story about the space between stars begins the same way. Something breaks, and somebody has to go looking for what's left of it. This is Salvage, the Shrieking Gate, book 1 in a series about a girl who reads wreckage for a living, the found family who taught her how, and a 200-year silence that is only just starting to answer back. What follows is the prologue and the first 6 chapters, the beginning of a much longer story, told the way it was written, unhurried, one piece of wreckage at a time. If you enjoy this audio presentation, please check out the full novel on Amazon. The link is in the description below. Find somewhere quiet. This one starts slow, on purpose. It doesn't stay that way for long. Prologue. Every child raised on a salvage crew hears the story at least once, usually from someone too tired to make it up fresh, so it comes out a little different every time. In the oldest version, it's a fuel hauler, 3 days from anywhere, engines dead, air going thin. The captain reciting the names of everyone she loved because she'd run out of anything useful to do. In another, it's a family ship, a father and 2 children, fleeing something the story never names, running not toward anywhere, but only away. In the versions salvagers tell each other, low-voiced, over the wreck of something they shouldn't be picking through, it's always a ship exactly like the one they're standing in, patched, tired, held together by people who couldn't afford better. What doesn't change, in any version, is the moment. The engines fail. The dark closes in. The real dark. The kind between stars that doesn't care what you were planning to do with the rest of your life. And then, for reasons nobody living has ever been able to explain, something opens. Not a gate exactly. Nothing with hinges, nothing that swung or turned on anything at all. The ships that found it, because it found them as much as they found it, describe something closer to a seam, a place where the dark got thin enough to fall through instead of freeze in. And on the other side, somewhere else entirely. Alive. Impossibly, ridiculously alive. Coughing up stardust and half believing they died after all, and this was simply what dying turned out to feel like. They called it a gate because that was the only word that fit. A place you passed through, not a thing you saw. Long because it felt like it took forever, though every account agrees it didn't take longer than a breath. And it happened again, and again, in different systems to different desperate ships, until desperation itself stopped being required, and someone worked out how to go looking for the seams on purpose. That was almost 1,000 years ago, long enough that no one alive remembers a single one of the first crossings firsthand. Only the story, worn soft as river stone from being handed down so many times. Long enough that the gates got names, and then numbers, and then terminals built around them, official and lit and licensed, so that traveling between stars became about as remarkable as catching a train. Except that the gates, it turns out, were never really humanity's to keep. 200 years ago, give or take, a system stopped answering. Not destroyed, nothing so simple as destroyed, just gone quiet, the way a room goes quiet when everyone in it has, without meaning to, stopped breathing at the same time. Ships that went looking didn't come back to say what they found. Ships that tried to raise it on any frequency, any protocol, any old half-forgotten trick, got nothing back but the particular flavor of silence that isn't the same as no one being home. That system had a name once. People still say it, the way people once said the names of gods they'd stopped quite believing in, half out of habit, half out of hope that saying it kept some thin thread of it real. Earth. Out past the terminals, out where the guild's maps go gray and salvagers pick through the wreckage of ships nobody claimed. That thread is getting thinner. Gates that worked for centuries have started, very occasionally, very quietly, to stop answering too. A whole region here, a single terminal there. No pattern anyone official will admit to, no warning most of the time, except a flicker right before. A gate lighting up one last time, unstable and wrong, like a candle flaring before it gutters out for good. The salvagers have a name for what's spreading. They call it the long static, and they say it the way sailors once said the name of a storm they respected too much to mock. They also have a rule about it, the only rule that matters. When a gate starts flickering, you don't wait around to see what it does next. Nobody, so far, has written down what happens if you do. Chapter 1. The dead don't talk. Not really. But they leave notes, if you know how to read them, and Wren Osei had been reading them since before she was tall enough to reach the manual override on an airlock without standing on something. This one said, "Panicked, then didn't." She could see it in the scorch pattern along the hauler's aft corridor, black tongues of it licking toward the escape pods instead of away from the engine core, which told her the crew had run the wrong direction first, toward the fire, not away from it, the way people did when the thing they were trying to save mattered more than the thing trying to kill them. Cargo, probably. It was almost always cargo. And then, 3 meters on, the scorch pattern stopped clean, an almost surgical line, like someone had simply turned off whatever was burning, which meant they hadn't outrun the fire. They'd fixed it. And then, judging by the fine gray dust settled undisturbed over every surface since, they'd never gotten the chance to feel good about it. "You're doing the thing," said a voice in her ear. "I'm not doing a thing. You're doing the thing where you go quiet and stare at scorch marks like they personally wronged you. Priya says it's unsettling. I think it's your third best quality." "What's my second?" "Don't have one lined up yet. Working on it." A clatter of tools through the comm, followed by a small, satisfied noise that meant Baz had gotten something open that wasn't supposed to open that easily. "Okay, panels off. You are not going to believe what they did to this power relay." "Surprise me." "They duct taped it." "People do that. People who want to die, Wren." She let herself smile, because he couldn't see it, and there was no reason to give him the satisfaction, and went back to the corridor. The Meridian had been a fuel hauler, registry stripped, hull plates scarred with the long silver scratches that meant it had scraped through an asteroid field at some point, without asking anyone's permission. Guild inspectors would peg it as a mechanical failure, engine fire, crew evacuated successfully to whatever transport picked them up. Case closed, another dull line in another dull ledger. Wren had been aboard 11 minutes and already knew that wasn't what happened, because the escape pods were still latched to their cradles, every one of them, undeployed, and because whoever had fixed that fire had done it with hands that knew exactly what they were doing, and people who knew exactly what they were doing did not, generally, forget to leave. She didn't say any of this out loud. There wasn't a manifest line for, "I think everyone on this ship made a very brave, very stupid choice, and I don't know why yet." There was only a manifest line for parts, weight, DREU value, guild tax withheld at source. So she cataloged the relay housing, the intact life support scrubbers, the reactor core that Baz was currently disassembling with the tenderness of someone handling a sleeping animal, and she kept the rest of it, the why of it, folded up small, the way she kept most things. "Wren," Priya's voice this time, steadier, coming through on the general channel instead of the private one Baz liked to use for jokes he didn't want Idris hearing. "You're 40 minutes into a 20-minute sweep. Captain wants a time check." "Tell the captain I'm being thorough." Captain says Thorough doesn't pay the docking fee at Trajan Yard, and the docking fee is due in 6 days. And if we're not back inside the hour, he's coming in after you himself, and you know how he gets in tight corridors. Wren did know. Idris was built like the door frames on the Meridian had personally offended him, and derelict hopping made him twitchy in a way he pretended was about safety protocol, and was actually, everyone aboard the Driftwood quietly understood, about not losing anyone else to a dead ship. He'd never said it that plainly. He didn't have to. It was there in the way he overbriefed every run, the way his voice went carefully flat whenever a salvage site turned up more bodies than gear, the way he still, 6 years on, kept a second bunk made up in his own cabin that nobody aboard had ever been assigned to, and nobody aboard had ever asked about. 45 minutes, Wren said. I want the bridge logs. You always want the bridge logs. They always know things the hull doesn't. She moved forward, past Baz, elbow deep in the reactor housing now, humming something tuneless and pleased with himself, and up through a companionway that still, impossibly, held gravity, some backup system limping along on fumes long after everything else aboard had given up. The bridge, when she reached it, was exactly as tidy as the fire damage had suggested it would be. Chairs pushed in, console dark but undamaged. A single flight log, hand-annotated in the margins, the way old-fashioned captains still like to do, even when the system logged everything automatically. Anyway, because paper, or the thin plastic sheet that had replaced paper generations back, didn't lie the way memory could. And some people trusted that more. The last entry was dated in Ani, Guild Standard, the way every official record in known space was dated, whether you were in Trajan or Hadrian or all the way out past the charted edge of Diocletian. Wren had never thought hard about why. It was just how time worked. Ships broke down, Drew got paid out, birthdays happened, all of it measured against the same fixed length of year, everywhere, for everyone. The way the ground under your feet was just the ground. It was Baz, actually, who'd first told her why, back when they were 9 and 11, and he'd just discovered he liked knowing things nobody had asked him to know. It's not just a year, he'd said, delighted with himself, the two of them wedged into the Driftwood's cargo bay during a storm delay. It's Earth's year. Whoever set the standard, centuries back, just used Earth's orbit because that's what everyone already had lying around. So every anno you've ever lived, every birthday, every guild filing anybody's ever signed, that's Earth's clock, not ours. We just never bothered building our own. That's a little sad, she'd said, not really meaning it. 9 years old and unbothered by most things that weren't immediately in front of her. That's what I said. He'd looked pleased and a little haunted at once, an expression she now recognized as uniquely Baz. We're all still keeping somebody else's time. Nobody even talks about it. She thought about that now, looking at the date on a dead man's flight log. A date measured out in the turning of a planet none of them had seen. None of them could prove existed. A planet everyone still, quietly, without meaning to, organized their entire lives around. She didn't know why it struck her harder today than any other day she'd read a manifest date. Maybe it was the fixed open escape pods. Maybe it was just one of those days the numbers didn't slide past unnoticed. She photographed the log, flagged the bridge for Baz's second pass, and turned to go. And stopped. Because through the forward viewport, past the Meridian's scarred bow, past the slow tumble of debris that hadn't decided yet whether it belonged to this wreck or the last one. She could see it. A shape, distant and dark against the Diocletian starfield. Too regular to be rock. An old terminal ring. Unlit, unmoving, exactly where it had sat, unused, for as long as Wren had been salvaging this stretch of the belt. "You're looking at the last word," Priya said, and Wren realized she must have drifted into view of the bridge camera, must have gone still, the way she apparently went still around things she found interesting, whether she meant to or not. "Don't. I'm not doing anything." You get a very specific look. It's the scorch mark look. I don't love it pointed at Nicomedia. It's just an old terminal. It's an old, dead terminal, Priya said. And there was something under the practicality in her voice. Something that had learned the hard way not to be casual about dead terminals. Nobody's cleared it in years. Guild flagged it decommissioned before either of us could walk. Leave it flagged. I said I'm not doing anything. You doing the thing, Baz put in cheerfully, from somewhere back near the reactor. It's your third best quality. Wren looked at the terminal a moment longer than she needed to. Long enough to notice, or think she noticed, one single point of light along its ring flicker, faint and orange, and gone again before she could be sure it had been there at all. And then she turned the camera away, because Priya was right, because there was nothing there but old metal and older superstition, because they had 45 minutes and a docking fee due in 6 days, and a captain who worried more than any of them let on. She didn't mention the flicker. There wasn't a manifest line for that either. "Bridge logs are flagged," she said instead. "Tell the captain I'm coming in." She did not look back at Nicomedia on her way down. She told herself that later, too, more than once, in the weeks it would take her to understand exactly how much that single unlooked-at second was going to cost her. Chapter 2. The Driftwood smelled like every home Wren had ever known, which was to say it smelled like solder and old coffee and the particular metallic sweetness of a life support scrubber that needed replacing 2 years ago and kept not getting replaced because something else always needed the Drew more. She loved it in the unexamined way you love a thing you've never had the option not to. "You're late," Cass said, not looking up from the flight console, where she had the Driftwood's port thruster diagnostics spread across 3 screens, and was doing something to the fuel mixture that Wren was fairly sure violated at least 2 guild safety advisories. "Idris logged you back 40 minutes ago. It is now 61 minutes ago. We found bodies. Wanted to be thorough. You always want to be thorough." Cass finally glanced over, dark eyes assessing in the quick, cataloging way she had, the same way she checked a docking clamp before she trusted it with the ship. "Anything good?" "A reactor core Baz is already in love with. Full scrubber bank, barely used. Bridge logs, for whatever that's worth to anyone but me." Wren dropped into the co-pilot seat, which was really just a seat, since the Driftwood hadn't had 2 working pilots at once since before Wren could remember, and pulled up the manifest. "Enough to make the Trajan fee, if the guild doesn't lowball the reactor core." "They'll lowball the reactor core." "They'll lowball the reactor core," Wren agreed. Cass exhaled through her nose, the sound of someone doing math she didn't like the answer to, and went back to the thruster panel. She worked the way she did everything, fast, a little too confident, hands moving before her mind had fully signed off on the decision, which was either going to make her a brilliant pilot or get her killed doing something spectacular. And Wren genuinely wasn't sure yet which. Cass had been aboard 3 years. She still flew like she was trying to prove something to someone who wasn't on the ship anymore. And Wren had stopped asking who, because the one time she had, Cass's face had done something complicated and closed, and she'd changed the subject so fast it left a mark. "You're doing something reckless to my ship," Wren said. "It's not your ship. It's more my ship than yours." "It's Idris's ship," Cass said, which was true, and which she said the way you'd remind someone of a rule you privately thought was a little sad. "And I'm making the burn efficiency better, not reckless. There's a difference." Priya would say there isn't. Priya thinks toast is reckless. Cass finally cracked something that was almost a smile. "How's the terminal look? You went past Nicomedia, right? On the approach vector?" Something in Wren went briefly, involuntarily still. The flicker. The single orange stutter of light against old metal. The thing she'd already decided wasn't worth mentioning to anyone. Same as always. Dead. Ugly. Priya lectured me about looking at it too long. Priya's not wrong to. Cass said it lightly, but there was an old family unease under it. The kind that came from a childhood spent hearing dinner table warnings Wren had never gotten, growing up wealthy and inner colony before all of it came apart. "My mother used to say you don't stare down a well, because eventually the well starts thinking you're asking it something." That's morbid. That's the inner colonies for you. We had morbid sayings for everything. It's what you do instead of therapy when you've got money. Cass shut the diagnostic panel down harder than it needed, which was as close as she ever came to admitting the sentence had cost her something to say. "Go log your haul. Captain wants everyone in the galley in 20. He's got that face on." "Which face?" "The one where he's decided something and hasn't told us yet?" Idris Osei did, in fact, have that face on, and he had it on for the better part of the meal, working through it the way he worked through everything difficult. Sideways, in increments, over food nobody was really tasting. "We're a hand short," he said finally, once Baz had stopped narrating the reactor core's finer qualities long enough to actually chew. "Trajan fees due in 6 days, and the guild's flagging our last 3 manifests for slow turnaround. We need another set of hands if we want the meridians stripped and logged before the deadline. And I'm not risking anyone doing a rushed job on a live reactor core just because we're short." "We've got 4 hands," Priya said carefully, in the voice she used when she already suspected the answer and didn't love it. "I want 5. Idris didn't look up from his plate. "There's a kid at Trajan Yard. Name's Theo Marsh. Guild referral. Came off a crew that got its license pulled last month. Smuggling charge. Not his, near as anyone can tell. But the whole crew got tarred with it, and now nobody local will touch him. He's good with reactor systems. Better than good, according to the one reference that'll still talk to me." "And you trust him," Wren said. It wasn't quite a question. "I trust that we need the hands, and I trust the reference, and I trust that a kid who just watched his whole crew go down for something he didn't do probably isn't looking to make the same mistake twice." Idris finally looked up, and there was something old and tired behind his eyes that had nothing to do with Theo Marsh at all. "I also trust all of you to keep your eyes open. That's not the same as trusting him yet. Nobody has to. Yet." Nobody said anything for a moment. Baz was the one who broke it, because Baz always was. "Does he know about the ship name?" he asked, deeply serious. "Because if he makes a joke about it, I feel like that's important information going in." "Everyone makes a joke about the ship name," Cass said. "I didn't." You made 3 jokes about the ship name in your first week. Those were observations. Wren let the noise of it wash over her, grateful for it the way she was always grateful for the particular ordinary chaos of her crew, and did not look at the empty berth down the corridor from Idris's cabin, the one nobody had ever been assigned, the one he kept made up anyway, 6 years running, for reasons nobody aboard had ever been brave enough to ask about out loud. She wondered, not for the first time, whether a 6th person aboard would make that empty berth feel more crowded or less lonely. She suspected Idris was wondering the same thing, and had been for longer than any of them knew. The knock came at the cargo bay hatch less than an hour later. 3 short raps, uncertain, like whoever was on the other side of it wasn't entirely sure they were allowed to knock at all. "That'll be him," Idris said, and went to let the 5th hand aboard the Driftwood. Chapter 3. Thea Marsh turned out to be 14, narrow-shouldered and dressed in a jacket 2 sizes too big for him that Wren clocked immediately as someone else's. A hand-me-down from a crew that didn't exist anymore, worn the careful way you wear the last thing you have left of something. He stood in the cargo bay hatch like he was ready to be told to leave, and had already decided not to argue about it if he was. "Captain Osei." He said it formally, like he'd practiced it. "Thank you for the referral. I won't make it a problem for you." "Wasn't expecting it to be one," Idris said, easy, the way he got when he wanted to put a nervous kid at ease and knew better than to say so out loud. "Come in. Meet your crew." Baz got there first, because Baz always got there first, sticking a hand out with the particular enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting all evening to ask his very important question. "Do you know what the ship's named after?" "Baz," Priya said. "It's a legitimate icebreaker. It's the same joke you make to everyone. It's not a joke, it's a diagnostic." "Driftwood," Theo said, and something in his face shifted, careful and unreadable. "Wood that's been carried somewhere it didn't choose to go, and washes up somewhere else, and either breaks apart or gets used for something. I looked it up. Figured I'd rather know before someone made me guess." Baz stared at him with the frank, delighted respect of a boy who had just watched someone win a game he didn't know he was playing. "Okay, he's staying." "That's not your call," Cass said, but she was almost smiling, arms crossed, taking Theo in with the same fast, assessing look she gave anything new aboard the ship. Thrusters, cargo, people. "You any good with reactors, or was that just something Idris's reference said to be nice?" "I'm good with reactors." "Prove it. Come look at something." It wasn't quite a peace offering. It also wasn't not one. Wren hung back near the hatch and watched him go. The way he moved, careful and light, through a ship he'd never been on. The way his eyes catalogued exits without quite seeming to. The way he said thank you to Priya for pointing him toward the corridor, like gratitude cost him something he was rationing. She knew that particular rationing. She'd grown up doing it herself, in the years right after, when every kindness anyone showed her felt like a debt she didn't have the currency to repay. She followed, at a distance, because it was easier to read someone in motion than standing still. Cass had him at the flight console within a minute, arms crossed, watching him study the diagnostic panel she'd been elbow deep in an hour earlier. He didn't touch anything at first, just looked. The way Wren looked at a scorch mark, the way you looked at something you were trying to hear before you trusted yourself to speak about it. "You leaned the fuel mixture," he said finally. "I improved the burn efficiency." "You leaned it past spec." He said it without heat, an observation and not an accusation, though Wren saw Cass's jaw tighten a fraction anyway. "It'll run hotter than the housing's rated for. Maybe not this run, maybe not the next one, But eventually that relay's going to cook itself, and you'll be doing this exact conversation with somebody a lot less polite about it than I'm being. It's fine, Cass said. It's fine until it isn't. That's not the same as fine. He glanced up at her, and there was nothing smug in it, which Wren suspected was the only reason Cass didn't throw him off the flight deck on principle. I can pull it back 0.2, and you'll lose almost nothing on the burn. 10 minutes. Cass looked at him for a long moment. The particular look she gave things that had, against her expectations, turned out to be competent, and then stepped back from the console. 10 minutes. I'm timing you. Fine by me. Baz, delighted, reappeared with a stool he clearly intended to sit on and watch the whole thing happen, already narrating it under his breath like a sporting event. Priya drifted past with a data pad and an expression that said she was cataloging this new information right alongside everything else she needed to worry about. And Idris stood in the doorway a moment, arms folded, watching his newly 5-person crew with an expression Wren couldn't quite place. Something that looked almost like relief and almost like grief, occupying the same small space on his face the way they so often did lately. Wren watched Theo work. He was good, genuinely good, hands moving with the same unhurried certainty she'd clocked in whoever fixed that fire aboard the Meridian, the kind of competence that didn't need an audience to be real. But every so often, in the pauses, his eyes went somewhere else entirely, flicked toward the cargo bay hatch, toward the comm panel, toward anything that might, in another life, have been a way out. Small, automatic, the kind of habit you didn't know you still had until someone who read Wreckage for a living happened to be standing close enough to notice it. Panicked, then didn't, she thought, and then caught herself, because that wasn't fair. Not yet. Not on a first night with a jacket that wasn't his and a crew he was clearly still deciding whether to trust with more than his hands. The dead didn't talk, but they left notes. The living, she was starting to think, left notes too. They were just harder to read, because they were still writing them. She didn't say anything. She just watched him get the fuel mixture back inside spec with 4 minutes to spare, and watched Cass check it twice out of pure reflexive distrust and find nothing wrong, and watched Baz cheer like they'd won something and thought, not for the first time that week, and not for the last, that she was going to have to be patient about finding out what Theo Marsh's note actually said. Chapter 4. They went back to the Meridian at first light, all 5 of them this time, because a reactor core that size didn't come out with 3 people and a prayer, and because Idris had decided, in the particular quiet way he decided things, that the fastest way to find out whether Theo Marsh could be trusted with the crew was to put him somewhere the crew actually needed him. Rules, Priya said, running through them on the shuttle over, checklist voice, eyes on Theo the whole time, even though the words were technically for everyone. Core stays cold until Baz clears it. Nobody touches the housing seals without a second set of eyes confirming pressure's equalized. If your suit flags anything, a flicker, a stutter, doesn't matter how small, you say so out loud immediately. You do not wait to see if it goes away on its own. Dead ships don't care how confident you are. Copy, Theo said. I mean it. I know you do. He said it without any edge to it at all, which seemed to throw Priya slightly more than if he'd argued. My old crew lost someone to a housing seal nobody double-checked. I don't need the speech twice. That landed heavier than he'd probably meant it to. Nobody quite knew where to put their eyes for a second. Baz, mercifully, filled the silence by narrating the shuttle's approach vector in a voice like a sports announcer, and by the time they docked, the moment had folded itself back into the ordinary noise of pre-work checks and suit seals and Cass complaining that her glove was chafing in a spot it had no business chafing in. The reactor core, once they were actually inside it, turned out to be worse than Baz's optimistic estimate from the day before. Whatever had fused the housing seals wasn't corrosion, not exactly. Theo found that out first, running gloved fingers along a weld line that shouldn't have existed. A patch job someone aboard the Meridian had done fast and desperate sometime in the ship's last hour. Not the elegant fire fix in the corridor. Something rougher. Something done by hands that were running out of time. They didn't have the right tools, Theo said, half to himself, crouched at the core's base. This is a field weld. Somebody sealed this under pressure, probably with whatever they had left after the fire, and it held, barely, but it means the housing's under more stress than it should be. If we pull the core out the standard way, straight extraction, there's a real chance it cracks the seal on the way and vents whatever's left inside. How much is left inside? Priya asked, already not liking the answer before she'd heard it. Not enough to be catastrophic. Enough to make everyone in this compartment very sick for a very long time. Theo looked up at Wren, of all people. Not Idris, not Priya. Like he'd already clocked, correctly, that she was the one who'd actually read this ship closely enough to have an opinion. You said the fire fix was clean. Precise. Whoever did that knew what they were doing under worse pressure than this. There's probably a manual release somewhere they'd have used, if the field weld was meant to be temporary. Wren thought about the corridor, the surgical line where the fire simply, cleanly stopped. Aft of the core housing, she said. There's an access panel. I clocked it yesterday and didn't think anything of it. Wrong shape for standard maintenance. Show me. They found it together, the two of them, crouched in a service crawl space barely wide enough for one person, let alone two. Theo's shoulder against hers, in a way that would have felt like an imposition from anyone else on the crew, and somehow didn't from him, because he held perfectly still the second he realized the space was tight, waiting for her to say if it bothered her. It didn't. She was too busy staring at the panel, at the manual release exactly where she'd guessed it might be, painted over in guild standard warning yellow that had gone dull and unnoticed for however many years this ship had been sitting here. Unclaimed. Its story unread by anyone but her. There, she said. There, Theo agreed, quiet, and something in his voice sounded almost like relief that had nothing to do with the reactor at all. The release worked exactly the way it was supposed to, once Baz talked them through the sequence over comms with the barely restrained glee of a boy who loved being useful more than almost anything in the world. The core came free clean. No crack, no vent, just a long, low groan of old metal finally letting go of a weight it had been holding since before any of them were within 100 systems of being born. Idris exhaled. On the general channel, a sound too heavy to be relief alone. Good work, he said. All of you. Theo didn't say anything, but Wren, watching him through her helmet visor as he ran a last check on the housing, caught the exact moment his shoulders came down half an inch. The particular unclenching of someone who'd been braced, without quite admitting it to himself, for the version of this morning where it went badly, and it was his fault. Trajan Yard smelled the way every guild dock smelled. Recycled air with an edge of solvent. Too many ships breathing the same thin atmosphere. Everyone's Drew value chalked up on a board in the intake bay like a scoreboard nobody had agreed to compete in. The Driftwood's manifest went up on that board within 20 minutes of docking. Reactor core, scrubber bank, hull plate, sundries. Total value assessed by a guild inspector with the flat, efficient courtesy of someone who processed 40 of these a day, and had stopped, a long time ago, finding any of them interesting. Cores flagged for a field weld repair, the inspector said, tapping through Theo's report without looking up. Docks the value 12% for undocumented prior damage. It's not damage, it's a repair, Wren said. Somebody kept that reactor stable long enough to save their crew with it. That's not a flaw, It's 12%, per Guild Schedule 7, subsection 4, the inspector said. Not unkindly, just entirely unmoved. The way a door is unmoved by which way the wind happens to be blowing that day. I don't set the schedule. I just read it. Idris put a hand lightly on Wren's shoulder before she could say anything else, and she swallowed it, because arguing with a guild inspector about fairness was like arguing with weather, and because the number that finally came up on the board, after tax, after the 12%, after everything, covered the Trajan fee with almost nothing left over, which was better than the alternative and worse than what any of them had actually earned. She was still working out how to feel about that when she heard it, 2 docks over. A woman's voice, raw and too loud for the enclosed space, arguing with someone in a gray auditor uniform who wasn't arguing back, who was simply repeating the same sentence in the same even tone, no matter how many times the woman said it differently. He had a license. He had 6 years clean. You don't get to just close it. You don't get to just... The site is designated a quiet zone as of 0600 this cycle, the auditor said, for what was clearly not the first time, reading it the way you'd read a label off a can. Salvage rights are revoked pending review. I'm sorry for your loss. Please direct further correspondence to the regional office. He's not lost. He's missing. There's a difference. The designation is quiet zone, the auditor said again, exactly the same, and turned to the next form on the stack. And the woman stood there with her mouth still open around whatever she'd been about to say next, because there was nowhere left to say it to. Wren didn't move. Beside her, she felt Idris go very still in the particular way he went still whenever this exact kind of conversation happened anywhere near him, which was more often than any of them liked to think about. Come on, he said quietly, and steered them all back toward the Driftwood, and nobody said anything the whole walk back, and Wren found herself doing the math without meaning to. How many docks over? How many days since? How quickly a person's whole life could get filed under a designation and closed. She thought about the flicker at Nicomedia. She still didn't mention it. Nobody talked much on the shuttle back, which was its own kind of unusual, given that the shuttle back was normally where Baz did his best material. He sat with his knees pulled up and his arms around them the whole ride, quiet in a way that made Priya reach over once and squeeze his shoulder, without either of them saying anything about it. It was Cass who finally broke it, once they were docked and the shuttle bay had sealed behind them, and it felt, marginally, more like being somewhere private. That happens more than they let on, she said, not looking at anyone in particular, arms crossed against a chill that wasn't in the air. Back when I still lived inner colony, there were whole news cycles about supply disruptions, route delays, nothing ever framed as that, as people. It was always framed like weather, something that happened to shipping schedules. She laughed, short and humorless. I didn't know it sounded like that, actually happening to an actual person. It doesn't happen often, Priya said, careful, the way she said most things that mattered to her. I want to say that. It's rare. But when it does... She stopped, started again. My first crew, before the Driftwood. We lost someone on a run. Not to a quiet zone, nothing that clean. Just a bad call, bad timing, a hull breach nobody caught in time. I was 11. I watched the auditors process that file, too. Same voice, same forms. I used to think it was the coldness that got to me. I don't think that anymore. I think it's that they're not being cold on purpose. It's just how the system runs. Cold is just what's left when nobody's actually required to feel anything. Baz, unusually quiet through all of this, finally spoke, small and serious in a way none of them were used to hearing from him. Is that why you're always doing the checklist? Twice? Even when it's annoying? Yes, Priya said. That's exactly why. I take back what I said about toast. Thank you, Baz. Idris found Wren later, after the others had scattered to their bunks, standing at the small viewport near the galley that looked out on the docked ships of Trajan Yard, all of them lit up gold against the dark, none of them, from here, looking anything like the kind of place where a family could get filed under a designation and closed. "You've got the look," he said, settling beside her, not quite touching, the way he always gave her room even when he wanted, visibly, not to. "What look? The one where you're doing math you don't want to be doing?" She didn't deny it. "How many, do you think? How many crews? How many people just gone and processed, and nobody outside the family ever hears about it because it's not framed as a story. It's framed as a filing." Idris was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the same gold-lit ships she was looking at. And when he finally spoke, his voice had gone somewhere careful and far away, the place it went whenever a conversation drifted too close to the 6-year-old shape of a question none of them had ever asked him outright. "More than the Guild publishes," he said. "That's all I'll say for certain." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He put a hand, briefly, on the crown of her head, an old gesture from when she'd been small enough for it to mean something different than it meant now, and left it there just long enough that she understood it wasn't nothing. "Get some sleep, Wren. We fly again in 2 days." She didn't tell him about the flicker. She told herself again that there was nothing to tell. An old dead terminal catching a stray reflection, nothing worth adding to anyone's already full plate of worry. She was starting to understand, though, in some wordless way she didn't yet have the language for, that she was going to have to say something eventually, and that eventually was getting closer every single day the fee got paid and the manifest got logged, and the ordinary, grinding, Drew-counted business of staying alive out here kept them all too busy to ask the right questions until it was much, much too late to like the answers. Chapter 5. The guild chart for the Diocletian sector hung in the Driftwood's galley the way it had hung there Wren's whole life. A soft glass display, always on, always updating, showing every mapped terminal, every registered rec field, every patch of open dark worth a salvage license. Green for clear, amber for disputed claims, red for quiet zone. 2 days ago, there had been 11 red patches on that chart, scattered thin across the sector's outer edge, none of them close enough to worry about over breakfast. This morning, there were 13. Wren stood in front of it a long time before anyone else was up, tracing the newest patch with one finger without quite touching the glass, the way you'd trace a bruise to see if it still hurt. It sat 2 systems out from the yard's registered rec fields, nowhere near Nicomedia, nowhere near anywhere she'd flown. That should have made it easier to look at. It didn't. "You're up early," Idris said, appearing behind her with 2 mugs of something that had started its life as coffee and had long since given up on being recognized as such. He handed her one. "Or you never went to sleep. I can never tell with you." 13, she said, nodding at the chart. "I saw." "It was 11. "I saw that too." He didn't sound surprised, which somehow made it worse than if he had. He sipped his terrible coffee and studied the chart the way he studied everything difficult. Sideways, patient, refusing to flinch first. "It's not a straight line, Wren. Some cycles nothing changes for months. Then you get a stretch like this. Doesn't mean anything's accelerating. Might just mean the mapping crews finally got around to confirming what was already true." Might, he agreed, and didn't sound like he believed it any more than she did. They flew out that afternoon for a job 2 systems past the yard. A mining transport called the Halcyon, deregistered 8 years back, sitting in an asteroid cluster nobody local had bothered stripping, because it was a long haul for a middling payout. Nobody local, that was, except a crew that had just barely made rent on the Meridian and needed something with more meat on it before the next fee came due. "It's a long way to go for a maybe," Cass said, running the flight plan, not disagreeing so much as making sure everyone had said it out loud at least once before committing to 6 hours of transit. "It's a long way to go for a definitely," Idris corrected. "Mining transport, full cargo hold, deregistered clean. No fire, no distress call on record. Somebody just walked away from a perfectly good ship and never came back for it. Which either means it's cursed, or it means the last owner went bankrupt mid-run, and the whole thing's been sitting there collecting dust and legally belonging to nobody. I'm betting on bankrupt." "You'd say that even if you were betting on cursed." "I would," Idris agreed, entirely unbothered, and went forward to the flight deck. Theo found Wren in the cargo bay an hour into the transit, doing inventory on gear they wouldn't need for another 5 hours, which both of them silently understood was really just something to do with her hands. "Can I ask you something?" he said, settling against a crate with the careful economy of someone who still didn't quite trust that he was allowed to take up space yet. "You can ask." "The chart in the galley. The red patches." He said it evenly, like a question about weather. But Wren had spent 4 days now learning how to read the difference between Theo's careful voice and his actually careful voice. And this was the second one. "My old crew ran routes out past Vespasian. We didn't have anything like that. Not that dense, not that close together. I want to understand what I signed on for before I find out the hard way." Priya, who'd drifted in partway through with a data pad she wasn't really reading, was the one who answered. "They're called quiet zones, officially," she said, setting the pad down. "That's the guild term, the one that goes on the forms." She paused, the way you pause before saying a word you've been taught, somewhere, not to say too casually. "Out here, most salvagers just call it the long static." Static like a signal that isn't coming through anymore," Priya said. "Ships that fly into one of those red patches stop answering. Not destroyed. Nobody's ever recovered wreckage from inside one. Not once. Not in 100 years of people being curious enough to try. They just stop being reachable. No distress call. No debris field. No last transmission cut off mid-sentence, which is somehow worse than if there was one, because a cut-off sentence at least tells you something happened. This is just silence, complete and total and permanent." "And it's spreading," Theo said, not a question. "It's spreading." Priya's voice had gone very flat and very careful, the voice of someone reciting something she'd rather not feel while she said it. Slowly, unevenly. Nobody official will say by how much, or why, or whether it'll stop on its own eventually, the way some things just do. There's no pattern anybody's cracked, not that they've told the rest of us anyway. Just more red on the chart most cycles than there was the cycle before. Baz, who had appeared in the doorway at some point without either of them noticing, added, quieter than his usual register, "Old-timers say the gates go first. Flicker right before. Like a bulb about to blow. You get sites where a terminal that's run fine for 200 years suddenly throws a flare, lights up wrong. And then a while later, sometimes days, sometimes cycles, that whole stretch goes quiet, and the terminal that flared is right in the middle of it, dead as everything else. Something went very cold and very still in Wren's chest, the exact shape and temperature of a single orange flicker she had watched 4 days ago along the dark ring of an old decommissioned terminal, and had told herself, twice now, wasn't worth mentioning to anyone. "That's just a story people tell," she said, and was faintly, distantly surprised by how steady her own voice came out. "Most stories people tell out here started as something somebody actually saw," Baz said, not unkindly, shrugging in the particular way he shrugged when he was more right than he wanted to be. "That's kind of the whole problem with them." Nobody had an answer for that. The halcyon was still 4 hours out. Wren excused herself to go check equipment nobody needed checked yet, and stood alone in the cargo bay a long while after, looking at nothing, thinking about a terminal called Nicomedia that everybody called the last word. And a single flicker of orange light she was starting to suspect she was going to have to talk about a great deal sooner than she wanted to. 4 hours later, the halcyon resolved out of the dark the way every dead ship did. Slowly, and then all at once, a shape that had been indistinguishable from background static suddenly snapping into something with edges, with a name, with a story Wren hadn't read yet. It was bigger than she'd expected from the specs. Mining transports usually ran long and narrow, built for hauling ore in a single, unbroken line from belt to refinery. But the halcyon had the wide-bellied look of a ship that had been refit at least once, cargo capacity bolted onto cargo capacity, until the original hull was just a memory, buried somewhere in the middle of it. Its running lights were long dead. Its cargo hold doors, visible even at this range, hung slightly open. Not blown open, not forced, just left, the way you'd leave a door open if you fully intended to come back in 5 minutes, and something had quietly made sure you never did. "No distress beacon," Cass reported, running scans from the pilot's chair. "No beacon at all, actually, not even a dead one. Like it was never installed, not like it failed." "Every registered transport's required to carry one," Priya said, frowning at her own readout. "Guild law, cross-system, no exceptions." "I'm telling you what the scan says." Idris leaned over Cass's shoulder, studying the readout himself, and Wren watched something pass behind his eyes that he smoothed over before anyone else could catch it. The particular flicker of a man doing math about risk he wasn't going to say out loud yet. "Bankrupt owner wouldn't strip a beacon," he said slowly. "Beacon's not worth enough to bother, and pulling it's a felony on top of whatever else got them into debt in the first place. Nobody desperate enough to abandon a whole cargo hold is careful enough to also commit a completely separate crime on the way out." "So what does that leave?" Baz asked, from the crawlspace hatch where he'd already started running his own diagnostics, voice pitched a little too casual to actually be casual. "It leaves a ship I want everyone extra careful on," Idris said, which was as close as he ever came to admitting he didn't have an answer. "Full suits, full comms check-in every 10 minutes, no exceptions. And that includes you, Wren. Don't give me that face. If anyone's instruments do anything strange, anything, even something small enough you'd normally shrug off, we regroup at the shuttle. No arguments, no thorough sweeps. Understood?" "Understood," they said, more or less together, and Wren caught Theo's eye across the cargo bay as they suited up, caught the same flicker of unease in him that she suspected was sitting, quiet and unacknowledged, in her own chest, the two of them recognizing something in each other's faces that neither one of them had the words to say out loud yet. The halcyon's open cargo doors waited ahead of them, dark and patient, the way dead things waited when they had nowhere left to be, and all the time in the world. Chapter 6. The cargo hold, when Wren's suit lights finally found the far wall, took her breath in a way that had nothing to do with the thin, recycled air inside her helmet. It was full. Not stripped, not looted, not even disturbed. Row after row of sealed ore containers, guild-stamped, still strapped down exactly the way regulation required for transit, sitting untouched in the dark for 8 years, while every salvager in 3 systems apparently decided this ship wasn't worth the trip. Wren had salvaged enough abandoned ships to know what desperation looked like. Desperation took the food first, then the tools, then anything that would fetch even a bad price, and it never, ever left a full hold sitting pretty for the next crew to find. "Nobody's been in here," she said, quiet, mostly to herself. Nobody local, anyway. Idris's voice, steady over comms from the shuttle, where he'd stayed behind per his own rule about never leaving a ride unmanned on a job that smelled wrong. Which either means the reputation kept people off, or the reputation started because people came and didn't like what they found and made sure everyone else heard about it before they had the chance to find out themselves. "Comforting," Cass said. "I do my best." They split as briefed. Wren and Theo forward toward crew quarters, Baz and Cass down toward engineering. Everyone on a 10-minute clock. Everyone's suit telemetry feeding back to Idris and Priya on the shuttle in a steady green line that Wren found herself checking more often than strictly necessary. Crew quarters were worse than the cargo hold, in the particular way that people's things were always worse than people's cargo. A half-eaten meal, freeze-dried into something unrecognizable, still sitting on a fold-down table. A child's drawing. A child's. On a mining transport, which meant somebody had brought a family out here, which meant this hadn't been some desperate, short-crewed run. Still magnet-clipped to a bunk wall, curling at the edges but otherwise untouched by 8 years of nobody caring. A jacket, draped over a chair, exactly the way you'd drape it if you meant to put it back on in 5 minutes. "They didn't pack," Theo said, and his voice had gone somewhere careful and far away. "Nobody grabbed a bag. Nobody took the drawing. People don't leave kids' drawings behind if they're leaving on purpose, even if they're leaving in a hurry." "So they didn't leave," Wren said. "Not the way the guild filed it. Or they left in such a hurry that grabbing anything at all stopped mattering." He was quiet a moment, moving his light slowly across the room, cataloging it the way she cataloged things, and she felt the small, strange comfort of being read by someone who'd learned to read the same way she had. "I've seen that face before. On my old crew, near the end. When something scares people badly enough, they stop being able to hold on to what matters to them. They just move. Toward something or away from something. I don't know yet," Theo said. "I don't think they knew either." Baz's voice came through comms 12 minutes later, pitched high and fast in the particular register that meant he'd found something and hadn't yet decided whether to be delighted or afraid. "Everybody needs to see this." Engineering, when Wren and Theo reached it, looked mostly like engineering. Cramped, industrial, every surface given over to conduit and coolant lines, and the enormous, dormant housing of a reactor that had gone cold years ago. What didn't look like engineering was the thing bolted, crudely, unmistakably not factory standard, to the aft bulkhead. A dish array the size of a dinner table, wired directly into the ship's main power trunk, with cabling that had clearly been run by hand, in a hurry, by someone who knew enough to make it work, and not quite enough to make it neat. "That's not guild issue," Cass said, arms crossed, keeping her distance from it the way you kept distance from anything that looked like it might still have opinions about being touched. That's not anything issue. Somebody built that. Somebody built that and then wired it straight into main power, Baz said, already crouched at its base, running a diagnostic with the particular reverence he usually reserved for things he was a little bit in love with. And it's still drawing current. Right now. 8 years, no crew, ships basically dead everywhere else, but this thing has been eating whatever trickle of power the reactor's still bleeding out, this whole time, like it's the only thing aboard anybody ever decided was worth keeping alive. Eating it for what? Idris asked over comms, and Wren could hear, underneath the question, the specific tightness of a man doing risk math he didn't like the shape of. I don't know yet. Baz. I'm not touching the power feed, I'm just listening. A pause. The particular silence of someone concentrating very hard. There's a receiver buffer. Whatever this thing's been catching, it's been storing fragments of it, looping the same short capture over and over because the storage is basically full and it's just recording over itself, keeping the newest copy, like a voicemail nobody ever picked up. Another pause, longer. I can play it. I want to play it. Baz. Priya's voice this time, careful. That's not standard salvage protocol, and this whole ship is giving me a feeling I don't love. I know. I want to play it anyway. He looked up, not at Priya, not at Idris, at Wren, the way Theo had looked at her 3 days ago in the Meridian's corridor, like she was the one person aboard who'd actually understand why this mattered before he could explain it properly. Something kept a family from packing a bag. Something's been running this ship's dying reactor into the ground for 8 straight years, just to keep listening to itself. I don't think we get to walk away from that and call it curiosity satisfied. I think we have to know what it is. Wren looked at the jury-rigged dish and thought about a crew that ran toward a fire instead of away from it, and a manual release exactly where a desperate hand would think to put it, and a flicker of orange light on an old, dead terminal she still, 4 days later, hadn't told a single living soul about. Play it, she said. Idris's voice came through a half-second later, tight and clipped and too late to stop anything. Everyone brace for... The engineering bay filled with sound. It wasn't a voice, not exactly, not at first. A low, warping static, degraded past 8 years of unattended storage, rising and falling in a pattern that took Wren several full seconds to understand wasn't random at all. It had rhythm. It had shape. Somewhere underneath the decay, threaded so faint it was almost easier to imagine than to actually hear, there was something that might have been words, might have been a voice, might have been nothing but the human mind's endless hunger to find a face in static where there wasn't one. Baz's hands had gone still on the console. Cass had stopped breathing, or looked like she had. And Theo, beside Wren, had gone the particular color of someone hearing something they recognized and desperately didn't want to. That's not local, Baz said finally, very quietly, once the loop cycled back to silence and hung there, waiting to run again. That's not anything in this system. That's not anything in any registered system. I need instruments I don't have on me to be sure, but I know what a local relay signature looks like, and this isn't one. Then what is it? Cass said. Baz looked up at all of them, pale under his suit lights, and Wren already knew, with the same cold certainty she'd felt reading the Meridian's scorch marks, exactly what he was going to say before he said it. I think it's coming from a long way outside anything we've got mapped, he said. I think somebody needs to check the origin vector against the old charts. The really old ones. The ones from before. Nobody asked before what. Nobody needed to. Idris made the call from the shuttle, once they'd all cycled back through the airlock and out of their suits, in the particular clipped voice he used when he'd already decided something and was working backward toward the reasons. "We don't report this," he said. "Not yet. Not to the guild, and not to anyone wearing gray." "That's a filing violation," Priya said, quietly, not arguing so much as making sure the fact was on the table where everyone could see it. "I know what it is. If the guild finds out we salvaged an anomalous transmission device and sat on it, I know what it is, Priya." Idris rubbed a hand over his face, and for a moment looked every one of his years, all at once, in a way none of them were used to seeing on him. "I also know what happens to anomalies once they go into a guild file. They get a designation. They get sealed. They get handed to somebody in a gray uniform who reads a form out loud in the same voice no matter what's actually written on it. And then nobody, not us, not that family who never got to grab their kid's drawing off the wall, nobody ever finds out what actually happened here. I want to know first. Then we decide." Nobody argued further. Wren wasn't sure whether that was agreement or just exhaustion, or whether, at this point, there was much of a difference. They took the array's storage core, carefully, over 40 careful minutes, Baz narrating every step like a surgeon talking himself through something he'd never quite done before, and left the dish itself bolted where it was, because pulling it free risked breaking exactly the thing they most needed intact. The cargo hold, full and undisturbed, stayed exactly as it had been for 8 years. Nobody had the stomach, tonight, to log a manifest off a ship that had swallowed a family whole, and never said why. The flight back to the Driftwood's current anchor point was quiet, in the specific way the shuttle ride from Trajan Yard had been quiet, except worse, because this time nobody had the excuse of grief to explain it. This was something closer to the particular silence of people who'd all just heard the same impossible thing, and hadn't yet worked out, individually, how frightened they were allowed to be about it. Baz broke it first, hunched over a datapad in the corner of the shuttle, cross-referencing the recording's degraded origin vector against every chart the Driftwood's archive held, including several that predated the current guild registry by more than a century. The kind of maps nobody bothered updating because nothing they charted was reachable anymore anyway. "I've got a partial match," he said, very quietly, not looking up. "How partial?" Wren asked. "Partial enough that I don't want to say it out loud until I've run it twice more." He glanced up at her once, and there was something in his face she'd never seen on him before. Not his usual delight at being right, not his usual dread at being wrong, but something caught exactly between the two, unable to decide which one it was more afraid of. "Give me until we're home. I want to be sure. If I'm right, I don't think sure is a word we get to use again for a long time after this." Wren didn't push him. She sat back against the shuttle's cold hull, listened to the low hum of the engines, and thought about a flicker of orange light she still hadn't told anyone about, and a full cargo hold nobody had touched in 8 years, and a signal that came from somewhere so far outside the charted dark that the only maps old enough to hold it were the ones everyone had long since stopped believing in. She thought she already knew what Baz was going to say. She spent the whole flight home hoping, quietly, that she was wrong. That's where the sample ends. 6 chapters in, with a lot more still waiting on the other side of that flicker. If you want to find out what Baz found buried in those old charts, the full book, Salvage, The Shrieking Gate, is available now on Amazon. Links in the description below. Thank you so much for listening. If this one pulled you in, a like and a share genuinely helps a new series like this get found. So if you've got a second before you go, I'd appreciate both. See you next chapter.